Hey, oh, right, here we are, part 1 of the Mules day out. Actually, it wasn't just one day out, it was 2 days out with an overnight stay in between. But the title, The Mules 2 days out, didn't really work, so there you go. Now, there's no particular reason for it apart from my own little tradition, but whenever I visit the Yorkshire Dales, the town of Laban is always my jumping off point. I didn't film the journey up from Hull because it's just boring, but I have to say, the mule really did impress me on the motorway. It was only a 20-25 mile stint on the A1M, part of the journey that I never looked forward to. But the little Royal Enfield just took it in a stride without any fuss or drama. And absolutely at no point did I feel that I was lacking the performance required for motorway work, even though she was heavily weighed down with about 30 kilograms of clothing and equipment in those Lomo adventure bags. In fact, the mule behaved impeccably throughout this little adventure and never gave me a spot of bother. I left Laban via the A684. There was something I wanted to have a look at, and I've got to admit I sort of regretted going to have a look at it. Well, that is, I regretted it at the time, but I didn't regret it afterwards. I'll explain in a moment. We travelled along the A684 through the tiny little village of Wensley and through towards the village of West Whitton, a place that has a special place in my heart, going right back to my youth. It's not even a 10-minute journey from Laban into West Whitton, and this is the place where in my youth my parents had a static caravan in a nearby Chantry caravan park. Now at the back of that caravan site was a hill called Pen Hill, which I've mentioned in the past, and over the years in my youth I must have clambered up that hill from just about every direction possible. Halfway up that hill was a farm track that covered the distance from West Whitton all the way through to West Burton, which is about 4, maybe 5 miles along the A684. Now, I only vaguely remembered where it was, because the last time I was there was in about 1984. West Whitton is essentially a one-road village, but about halfway through it does have another little lane running off it, and I remember the access to this track was somewhere on that lane, halfway up the hillside on a sharp bend, but there are quite a few sharp bends on this lane. This is a very steep hill, for the most part about a 1 in 4, and as the mule chugged away relentlessly up, I checked out every bend to see if I could see anything that seemed familiar. Almost 4 decades is a long time, and not only does your memory play tricks on you, but landscapes change. In fact, it seemed to have changed so much I almost overshot it. The entrance is rather inconveniently situated right on the edge of a very steep, sharp bend, with a 1 foot deep pothole at the edge of it, and it seemed a lot narrower than I remembered it. Now, the last time I was on this track, I was riding a Suzuki GSX 550. Not exactly an off-road bike, and I had a pillion. And I don't remember it being a particularly difficult path to traverse. I had a packed lunch with me, and the plan was, because I remembered there was a spot of outstanding natural beauty on the hillside, to stop there for my lunch. This track seemed very different to how I remembered it. For a start, there were a lot more trees that obstructed the view of Wensleydale, the valley, but at least the track surface seemed pretty much how I remembered. But then it started to get quite a bit rougher, and I started to think perhaps I'd remembered it wrong. At first, my biggest concern was the tyres, because there were lots of sort of golf ball sized stones which looked very sharp, and the well packed track surface had turned into a sort of a jumbled scree. Now, I'll be the first to admit it, I'm not an off-road rider. I consider myself pretty hopeless off-road. I don't see the point of it. There's plenty of tarmac around, and tarmac is smooth and secure and safe. It was designed for riding and driving vehicles on. So I've never really understood why people go off-road for fun. I know the little bullets are quite famous for the fact that they regularly are used for going over the Himalayas on roads that are far worse than this, but I'm not. The further along I went, the more I felt out of my depth, to be honest. The standard bullet handlebars were a bit low for this kind of work, so standing up was strenuous, and as time went along, the scree had been worn away, exposing jagged, broken bedrock of the hillside. And my lack of off-road skills certainly weren't helped by that 30 kilograms of luggage strapped on the back of the bike. I've got absolutely no idea how I took a Suzuki GSX 550 over this with a pillion on the back. I blame it on those bloody farmers and the tractors. I'm just glad that I put that sump guard on a few weeks ago, because this could have been catastrophic without it. At long last, I reached that spot where I planned to have my lunch. It wasn't quite how I remembered it, but that was the spot. A sort of craggy, wild little area with short grass. A perfect location for a spot of lunch while I admired the wonderful landscape. Now, after my lunch, I'd reached a sort of a fork in the road. There was a high road which didn't lead to where I wanted to be. In fact, it doesn't really lead anywhere. And there was a low road which took me to where I wanted to be. But there was a problem with this low road. You see, about a mile of tarmac and 3 miles of this rough track had brought me to the altitude that I was currently at. And this low road relinquished all that altitude in less than 3/4 of a mile. So it was very steep, and as a result of that, most of the motor vehicles that have used it in the past 40 years had worn away the scree, so all that was really left was the bedrock, which again had been churned up, broken away, and resembled a very badly made flight of stone steps more than anything else. And so, with a pretty useless off-road rider riding a road-going bike with less engine braking than I would have liked, ABS that won't switch off, using Avon road riders which have a pretty low tyre pressure and are well known for punctures, fully laden with 30 kilograms of luggage. What could possibly go wrong? Ground clearance in places ran out. I was certainly glad I had that bash plate on. And it was just a matter of keeping the bike in first gear, putting gentle but firm pressure on the rear brake, being careful not to allow the ABS to kick in, and just steer through the hazards as best I could. Somehow I felt like the abusive owner of a faithful pack animal. What I was doing just didn't seem right, but there was no turning back now. And believe me, the camera angles from my action camera do not do any justice to the gradient this bike was going down. Eventually I reached the civilization of the valley floor. The track surface improved considerably, and before too long I reached that lovely safe tarmac. The track brought me out onto an unclassified road near to West Burton, and I followed that unclassified road up back onto the A684. Time was marching on. I'd spent far too much time on this track, and I had one more stop planned before I checked into the Green Dragon Inn in Hardrow. The Ribblehead Viaduct, which was getting on for 40 minutes, maybe an hour's ride from where I was. Now this little road brings you onto the A684 near to Aysgarth, and I think what I'll do is I will tomorrow morning publish a virtual ride from Aysgarth to Hawes. Obviously I've already published the ride from Hawes to Ribblehead, so that should give you plenty of time to watch those two virtual rides that take you up to the next destination. And in part 2 of this little mini video series, we'll kick off from Ribblehead. I'll just let the video run now until we reach Aysgarth. I'd like to say a big thank you to my patrons, without whom this trip would not have been possible, and I'll see you again in part 2 very soon.